So, welcome everybody. I hope you enjoyed the session this morning with the keynote speech with Steve Schmidt, our CISO, and welcome you to one of the first presentations this morning, establishing AWS as a trusted partner. My name is Chris Panisi, and I work as a compliance specialist based out of London in EMEA in our financial services industry. So what I'll be covering through today is the process that customers go through in establishing AWS as a trusted partner. So the question that gets asked is, what does it mean to become a trusted partner? And becoming a trusted partner is not a feeling, it's a calculation. And what I mean by that is, as part of our day-to-day interactions with each other, whether we're using services online or business-to-business interaction, is the establishment of trust goes through a series of mechanisms. And throughout those mechanisms, we're constantly evaluating whether we can trust each other, trust those services, or trust the people that we work with. So the question then becomes is, if trust is a calculation, then what do our customers look for in that exchange? But before we go into that, it is important to recognize that customers, and everybody as part of our daily dealings, are looking for transparency and consistency at all stages of the interaction. So, question, what do customers look for in order to establish trust with AWS? And over the course of my time at AWS, I've categorized these into 5 stages. And they're characterized by principal questions, which I'll go into further detail. So the first one is, how do we work with you? Working with AWS is different because when customers first look at the cloud, whether it be a startup, a small business, or a large enterprise, what they may be used to, especially for larger companies, is mechanisms of outsourcing or a SaaS provision. So it's very important to understand that the way that we work with our customers is different. Next stage of the assessment is, okay, we understand how we work with AWS. Do you have what I need to run my critical workloads? So in short is, can you provide me with the tools and services to operate my business? As we're talking about the journey of customers placing their critical workloads, systems from their on-premise data centers into the cloud, the question of security comes up. And in line with the shared responsibility model, which I'll talk about, is the question that gets asked is, can we be secure on AWS? Can we guarantee that we have appropriate controls and our data is protected securely? And then we go through a controls attestation for process for that, etc. After there's like an element of due diligence, analysis of security, then some of the real concerns come out. And this is especially applicable for highly regulated industries where data privacy is absolutely key. And then finally, can you help us build? Which in my mind is the fun stage, is where there's an element of trust established. Now it's about getting on with the job at hand. So if we look at the first stage, and it's categorized with this question, how do we work with you? Then one of the first things that we introduce customers to is the concept of the shared responsibility model. And I'm sure some of you may have seen this before, but I'll go over it again. So what we've got described in orange there is basically AWS's responsibility in providing services to you. So in terms of compute, storage, database, and networking, we provide those fundamental services to you, and what we need to guarantee to you is multi-tenant isolation. So when you use those services, only you can access those services. Underpinning that is the AWS global infrastructure. So we're completely responsible for the hardware and the physical infrastructure that has been built to support the provision of AWS services. In terms of the blue, you have full freedom and capability to configure what encryption you want on the platform, whether it be client-side, server-side, how you network, your data flows on the platform, the operating systems, the applications you place on top, but most importantly, the customer data, your data that you choose to place on the platform. Now, this is fairly self-explanatory in the sense that it's highlighted through the diagram, but there's a deeper meaning to the model. And this is what comes out, and it's part of the working relationship with AWS, is because customers are used to a different way of operating, and based on my experience, is there is a mindset change that happens when customers interact with AWS. And what that means is, especially for large customers who have a due diligence process, that have defined security departments, that already have processes defined for outsourcing of SaaS provisions, there's a modification or a transformation that needs to happen. And it's a journey that we work with our customers on. And that's the key thing, and this evolves over time. And that's one of the key things to establishing that working relationship with AWS and us with our customers, is making sure that we are transparent as possible, and this is evident through our documentation. And one of the key things is, whilst this is primarily the shared responsibility model for which we operate, we do have variations of this as is applicable for our managed services and our containerized services. And what we do through all stages of the interaction with our customers is to be very clear about that through our dialogue when you're dealing with subject matter experts, as well as our documentation. So once customers have got a principal understanding of the shared responsibility model, the next assessment, which is primarily a business assessment, is, do you have what I need to run my critical workloads? And that devolves down into a number of key questions that customers ask us. So the first one being is, can I choose where I place my data and control it? And in short, the answer is yes, but give me the detail. So what we have here is, this is our regional map of where our regions exist. And it's important to understand that regions in an AWS context are geopolitical structures. So what I mean by that is, any region that AWS has deployed globally exists within a country or territory subject to the laws and jurisdiction there. And so, for example, we have Paris in France, Frankfurt, Germany, US East and West in the US, etc. And so when you use the platform, you get to choose where you place your data. And that's a very key thing for customers, because from a business perspective, they would obviously want to locate their services near to their base of operations and where their customers can access those services and the data, but also from a legislative and privacy perspective. So if we're talking, say, for instance, GDPR, which is a global data protection regulation that has come out of the EU, data location is very important. But one of the key elements of trust is, one of the questions that customers pose to us is, do you back up my data? Do you copy my data cross region? And the fundamental answer to that is, no, we do not. But what we do is provide you with the functionality as part of, say, a simple storage service, S3, to enable you to copy the data cross region to locations that fit your business needs. And in providing transparency of this, we provide this through our documentation, in terms of our product and service documentation, as well as our assurance reports. So the next question that follows upon that is, what about resilience? I need to be running critical workloads on AWS with recovery point objectives that are near zero. So highly available systems. Do you, AWS, provide the infrastructure that allows me to build resilient architectures on AWS? And the way that we do that is through the construction of our regions. So if we're talking about AWS's global infrastructure, and this is a very important conversation, that we have with our customers is to understand how this works, because this deviates from the traditional DC model where you have failover between one DC and another. So in the context of how our regions are architected, is our regions consist of 2 or more availability zones. And so the question becomes, what is an availability zone? An availability zone is a logical construct that consists of 1 or more DCs. And each AZ is constructed such that we have redundant power, redundant networking, and connectivity, but more importantly is what we do as part of our region build is we ensure that at least 2 AZs in a given region have separate environmental threat risk zones. So what that enables you to do as a customer is to architect for what we call multi-AZ failover. So that enables you to implement the architectures that you require for your high availability workloads. And we have documentation on this because we understand that this is a very important topic for our customers. So we have a number of white papers and we have controls that are listed in our third-party attestation reports to support this. After key questions such as data location and resilience have come about, the next question is, okay, what is the AWS service portfolio? Now what this diagram represents is a list of services grouped by themes, but it's meant to illustrate that we have quite a number of services to help you build the workloads that you need to in the cloud. So whether it be IoT, AI, ML, or whether it be mobile workloads, analytics, etc. We have a suite of services in each of those product themes. And underpinning that is where you want to implement your own specific services, say like if thinking MXNet for AI/ML, you can do that on the core services such as EC2. And then we have a range of security and compliance services to help you support the build out of that. So the question after that becomes is, okay, I've looked at the AWS service range. What happens if AWS does not have the service that we need? And one of the things that drives our customer development is the fact that it is driven and it comes from our customer base. So people out in the field, when working with their customers, if the customers notify us or tell us that we would require or they would like certain functionality that exists within a specific service or even a new service, we raise what we call a product feature request, a PFR. And then what happens is internally is we talk amongst our community to understand is, are there other customers that have placed that demand? And given that prioritization and the want for new services and features, this is what drives our service development. And as you can see in the chart there, is this has grown more than linear over time. So the key point is if we don't have a service that you need, we are transparent about that. That may lead you to make the choice that AWS is not for you, but that's part and parcel of being a trusted partner. But one thing that we do work towards is if you want a particular service or feature, and this seems to be widely in demand in the vertical that you work in or the markets, then we will work to get that for you. So once a customer has assessed their business needs on AWS, then the primary question that comes about is security. Because moving from on-premise to the cloud raises a lot of security questions in any government or commercial industry or not-for-profit. And 2 questions arise from that is, how does AWS secure the cloud? And how can we secure the cloud? And the most important process that we go through is the assessment of how AWS secures the cloud. And the first thing that I want to make it clear is the mantra and the way that we think about security. For us, security is job zero. And what does that mean? That means that even before we start with step 1 to develop any service or undertake any venture, security comes before step 1. It is step 0. It is the primary consideration in everything that we do. And another mantra that we have is, and as quoted by our CISO, Steve Schmidt, is keep humans away from the data. And the reason for that is where we have processes that are highly manual, they are prone for error. And even with the best of intentions, humans make mistakes. So where possible, we automate our processes and the delivery of services to help us scale. And the bottom line is we would not be able to scale as a hyperscale cloud provider unless we had highly automated systems. And this is demonstrated through, we have over 50 global certifications. I'll talk through that shortly. We have an industry-leading security teams that operate as you would expect, and to a 24/7, 365 days basis. And we have security infrastructure through our global certification process that satisfies military, banking industry, and other highly regulated industries. But also, over the lifetime of AWS, we have made over 1 million security enhancements that have come off the back of customer interactions. So, with that mantra in mind, then the question becomes, okay, what global standards and regulations do you comply with? Because whilst I may talk about how we operate as a company, what our thoughts are on security, every customer needs a basis for assessment, needs to be able to look at our controls, see what our independent auditors have assessed and thought about our control structure, and then make up their own decision in terms of, do we have the appropriate security in our environment to ensure that we protect your data? And to that end is we have over 50 certifications globally and also country specific. So what that means is what we have here is three columns, sorry. So in the left-hand column, we have the certifications and attestations that we adhere to. So you'll see some global ones, which I'll talk about shortly, such as the ISO standards, but we also have specific in-country certifications and attestations, such as Cyber Essentials Plus in the UK, FedRAMP in the US. In terms of, in the middle column, laws and regulations, is privacy is a very key concern. There is a myriad of privacy legislation for individual countries, as well as you have broader privacy legislation such as GDPR. So we comply with all the relevant laws, regulations, and privacy statutes that are applicable to where AWS operates globally. And we provide that through our compliance, details on that, through our compliance center, which is publicly available. It's a link on our website, as well as through various attestations and reports. And finally, is we understand there's a lot of best practice alignments and frameworks. So we've got the Cloud Security Alliance, we got the Center for Information Security, so the CIS benchmarks. So we align to those frameworks as well. So this is one of the key processes that customers go through, is having a look at that. And this is provided through a tool that we call Artifact. So when you get onto the AWS platform, just like you would access any other service, is you can go to this Artifact tool and get access to the relevant certification or framework alignments as you see fit, so you can make that assessment in terms of the posture of our security control framework. What we find, and what I've found over my time in AWS, is this is the actual core set of certifications and attestations that customers look at, simply because they are global standards. And we've got the Cloud Security Alliance, so what I'm referring to there is specifically the Cloud Controls Matrix. So we have an alignment mapping to that. ISO 9001 in terms of quality, 27001 in terms of information security management, 27017 in terms of cloud-specific controls, and 27018 for data privacy. We are also what I'd say a PCI DSS Level 1 certified data center provider. So what that means is, for industries like the payment industry, is they can and organizations associated with the card processing, etc., they can implement PCI workloads on top of AWS, and they inherit the PCI controls that are a part of our attestation throughout that process of assessment when they get their qualified security assessor in. And then we also have SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3 in terms of system and organizational controls. So we make those reports readily available to our customers to enable them to assess our security posture. And our subject matter experts, like myself or any other personnel that work in AWS, are very more than happy to talk through those controls where customers have further queries and information that they want. So after customers have gone through that process of assessing AWS for security, then the key question becomes is, how do we be secure? Because whether you're talking about a small enterprise, a startup, through to a large organization, is to use AWS effectively, an organization needs to build out its security control framework on AWS. And this is no small endeavor, it takes time. And so what we've done is we've got over 25 security services that we make available to our customers, and they're grouped in terms of 5 themes. So the first one, which is the most important, is identity. So our fundamental service, which is identity and access management, IAM, is tightly integrated through into every other AWS service. That allows you to implement coarse and fine-grained control over your workloads and the services that you use. You've also got the other identity services such as single sign-on, directory service, etc. We have a suite of detective control services such as Security Hub, which is a single pane of glass, Guard Duty for cloud intrusion detection, Config for continuous compliance monitoring, Cloud Trail, which provides an audit trail of AWS service usage, so services invoked or configured on the platform will show up in Cloud Trail, what's the activity, and Cloud Watch that enables you to invoke certain commands depending on the audit trail that has come through. In the middle, we have infrastructure security to maintain, so for anti-denial of service protection, we have WAF, our web application firewall and Shield, and we have the other services listed there. Most importantly, in terms of data protection, is we offer a number of encryption services. So we have AWS Key Management Service for storage, Cloud HSM, Certificate Manager, and Macie for DLP. And on the right, for incident response, is config rules, which enables you to implement a rule. We also have some pre-built rules in the actual platform. It enables you to define rules that measure the state of the configuration of AWS services against your own compliance policies to give you a continual view of whether your workload or workloads are in compliance with your policy and procedures. And Lambda in itself it's basically a piece of code that you can invoke from CloudWatch, but essentially depending on the audit trail or the logging that you see coming through on the platform, is you can choose to take corrective or detective action based on how you've defined AWS Lambda in accordance with your security policy. But in short, so we have a myriad of services in terms of making customers aware of how they work. We provide a lot of best practice documentation, not only at the service level, but in terms of certain themes like incident response, what we'd call continuous compliance, etc., that help our customers to architect for security. So once customers have gone through the security of AWS and its services, then we get some of the real concerns or some of the real questions that customers ask us to answer and help us get real comfort in terms of that we consider security to be job zero, and we are working to ensure their data privacy. So the first question that we get is, can we encrypt our data? And how can we do that? And the answer is yes. And the way that we have actually geared our platform is encryption is incorporated within all our services and on the platform. So you can build your applications and your infrastructure on AWS to encrypt data in transit or data in storage. And we have made this a lot easier. So if I use a service such as Elastic Block Store, so EBS, or Simple Storage Service S3, is implementing encryption can be as simple as a one-click, and that is visible throughout the platform. If you require further control in terms of the management of the keys and how that encryption is done, then we have AWS KMS, our key management service. And that is the primary service that customers use. And that service itself is integrated with over 45 other AWS services. And with KMS, you can create, delete, revoke, and manage your own keys. And more importantly, you can define what those keys are used to encrypt, which services they interact with, and the users and administrators within your organization that have access to those keys. And as part of the KMS service provision, only you get to access and manage those keys, and that is logged through CloudTrail, which can be made visible to you. And to demonstrate the truth of that is we provide a number of documentation with regards to KMS, not just in terms of how to use and configure KMS, but also in terms of the cryptographic details of the service itself through white papers that we publish to give customers assurance and understanding how the KMS service itself operates. Also importantly is the underlying HSM that is used to support KMS is FIPS 140-2 level 2 compliance. So it goes through a rigorous process of external evaluation to ensure that it meets, industry standards. And this is especially important for a lot of government and highly regulated industries that want to get a level of confidence in the way that that crypto system works, as well as ensuring that they only access and manage the keys. The next question, and it's quite an important question that we get from customers, is can the government access my data? And so the fundamental question that comes out of that is, how does AWS manage information requests? And this is very important because maintaining customer trust is highly important to us. We need to be working continuously and daily to ensure that you can trust AWS for your data, as data privacy is very important. And so one of the key things that we would say in this regard is Amazon does not disclose customer information unless we're required to do so to comply with the legally valid and binding order. So basically, when we receive, whether it be a subpoena, a search warrant, or a legally binding order, we assess that order in terms of its validity. If it's overreaching or too broad, we reject that, and we have a track record for doing that. Where the request is valid and it's something that we have to work with, then the key question that comes from our perspective is, can we notify our customers? And when we can, we do. And that allows you to seek the appropriate protections and to deal with that particular information request. There are instances that when we do receive an information request, there may be certain circumstances where we cannot disclose that. And that is the only time where we cannot inform our customers. And an example of that is when there is clear indication of illegal activity that a customer is undertaking on the platform. So that's very important. But the overarching message that we send to our customers is, it is your data that you place on the platform. You can encrypt that data. And as you only have access to manage the keys, then that data is rendered useless if it is encrypted. So that is one of the overriding protection mechanisms that you do have when putting data on the AWS platform. And far be it from me to say this, one of the key things in demonstrating this is transparency. So we are very transparent in terms of the information requests that we receive, and as such we publish a 6-monthly report which details the number of requests that we've received over that period of time, broken down into categories of how we have dealt with those requests. So we make that available to our customers because we understand this is a very important topic for them. The next question is, how does AWS manage administrative access? We are trusting, customers trust us when they're placing their data on the platform, so they want to know that how do you ensure that in the rare case that there is a requirement for manual access to production, how do you protect that? How do you ensure there are appropriate controls so that no one is accessing my data without our approval? So there's a couple of things that I want to mention here. So the first thing is automation. And as I mentioned earlier, is as per our CISO's mantra, is keep humans away from the data. And what that means is AWS is a highly automated environment. We have automation in a lot of the things that we do, and when that automation fails, we have secondary automation to try correct the errors that have happened in the primary automation. But there are instances that there is a manual level of access required to production, and we want those cases to be rare, and we want to be learning from those. So that's the first key point that I make, is it is not a common occurrence, and simply because that we could not operate at the scale that we do unless we operated with that mantra in mind. The second is the technology controls that we have to gate and control access to the AWS service network. And so there are a couple of technological controls that we have here. So the first is for any personnel that may need to access the logical network, they do not have access to the AWS physical infrastructure and vice versa. So there is that segregation of duties. The second thing is the AWS corporate network. So when I log on to AWS as an employee, the corporate network is a totally separate network to the AWS service network where you place your data and invoke the services. And the connection between the AWS corporate network and the AWS service network is tightly controlled, subject to multi-factor authentication, and is controlled through a Bastion process. And when that access does occur, it is logged, and those logs are kept for further review and to understand what activity was performed on the platform, and to also determine can that activity be automated at a later stage. In terms of process controls, access to production is not automatic. It has to go through a rigorous approval process. There has to be a demonstrable reason why that access is needed, and then it has to be approved by a number of people before it is granted. The level of access required has to be noted down as part of that approval process, has to be scoped, and it has to be time-bound. And as I was mentioning in conjunction with the technology controls, is the subsequent access that is executed on the platform is reviewed in line with the appropriate ticket or the approval to make sure that it was as intended, and then a further analysis is done to try automate what had transpired. And the way that you can get assurance and comfort over this process is many of these controls are documented in our assurance reports, which you can review through the Artifact tool. One of the final key questions that we get from the customers is, how does AWS secure the hypervisor? And this is very important because cloud technology by its nature operates on virtualization technology. So at the core of that is, what hypervisor controls do you implement, and how do you make sure that you ensure the principle of multi-tenant isolation within the AWS platform? And it comes down to two things that I'd mention here. And one is experience, and the second one is the level of innovation that we apply. So if I'm thinking in the context of experience, is we have over 10 years working with hypervisor technology in terms of building it, scaling it, maintaining it, for it to operate and service our customer base as it has grown over the many years for which AWS has operated. And in terms of the hypervisor technology, we use two main technologies. So we use Xen and we use the Linux KVM. And in terms of Xen, one of the key advantages is being with AWS is AWS is part of the Xen project. And so with respect to that, what that means is we get advance notice on vulnerabilities and concerns regarding the actual platform. And what that enables us to do is to triage and assess those vulnerabilities and apply non-intrusive patches to ensure that we are maintaining the security of the hypervisor at all times. And then we notify our customers through our security bulletins in terms of the activity that we've done, and also if the security could affect them. And one of the key things to note is because our Xen hypervisor is highly modified, and this is through the process of innovation, is what we've done over the years to make sure that we operate as efficiently as possible is we have removed and stripped out unnecessary code as part of the actual hypervisor itself. So what you'll actually find is when there have been vulnerabilities that have been notified or made publicly available regarding the Xen hypervisor, is some of them don't apply to AWS, and that is simply because that code base doesn't exist within our version of Xen. And we make that transparent and visible through our security bulletins as well as our security blog in terms of what we're doing with the hypervisor, and as I said, any security notices that are of interest to our customers. Having said that, we appreciate that customers want further security with regards to the actual hypervisor technology, and this is where the Nitro technology has come in. What Nitro operates on our C5 instances, and what it does is it actually isolates the memory and the storage processing from software into a separate hardware to allow that further level of isolation with regards to hypervisor technology. So once we've gone through those 4 stages, so firstly, the shared responsibility model. Second is, are our services fit for use in terms of your business endeavors, security, and addressing key customer concerns, then the question is that we receive, and it's the best question to receive, is, can you help us build what we need? And what that means is, do you have the tools and services to help us build? And the answer is yes. But that requires a number of things. So in terms of, do we have documentation? Do we have documentation to describe and to be able to determine how we use and configure those services? Do you also have documentation and best practices in line with things like security incident management, DevOps, etc.? And yes, we do. We are constantly working to provide that documentation, especially in terms of best practices and what's current in the industry. We also have in-house industry expertise, whether it be through the account team or certain specialists to help our customers build. We realize as part of customers working with AWS is they need to be developing capability in-house, because in line with the shared responsibility model, they need security expertise, they need developers, they also need their risk functions, if applicable, risk and compliance functions, to understand AWS and to build in appropriate processes to enable the use of AWS. So this is where we have training and certification. We do recognize that AWS, some of the services are limited, and our partners have a greater competency from a technology perspective, but also as AWS is a technology provider, there are managed consultancies that realize and can articulate to our customers better than us the business use of those services. So we have an extensive global partner competency. At times, customers require, especially in the build out of what we call an enterprise security control framework, need an element of heavy lifting. And this is where our professional services come into play. And as well, we have industry affiliations. So we recognize that certain industries and verticals have specific needs, and then therefore we have the appropriate industry associations and run a series of AWS-led industry events to help stay in touch with that market and understand what our customers need, but also to promote how to use the services within that given market. So once a customer has realized and understood those tools and started building within their organization, one of the key questions that we then get is, okay, we're building this workload, but how do we know? How do we know we have architected it in the best way possible? And this is where the concept of our well-architected review comes into play. And what the well-architected review is it is an assessment mechanism that cuts across 5 pillars of what we think is important in an AWS workload. So it is a series of questions that one of our subject matter experts will work with your project and program and technological teams to understand how you have architected for operations, how you have architected for security, reliability, performance efficiency, and cost optimization. And because one of the things that we don't want is customers to be implementing workloads where there is inefficient use of resources or that's not optimized for efficiency. And whilst that may seem counterintuitive, because obviously we're reducing the cost that a customer would pay, is we find that is better for a customer. And that is what works to establish trust, is to help our customers to implement workloads on AWS in the best way possible for them. And so then the question becomes is, okay, we've got this well-architected review, how do we then apply that within our enterprise? And one of the key recommendations that comes out of that is applying the well-architected review in the context of the project and program governance lifecycle. And the best stage to do a well-architected review is as part of before go live. But a little bit before go live, because obviously you've got to allow time to sort of rectify any sort of findings or any sort of activity that comes from that assessment. And it is a consistent mechanism that you can apply across your technology portfolio. So I've talked about, okay, our services to help build, in terms of how do we assess our workloads. So the next question is, okay, fine, we're ready to promote a workload to production. What about operational support? We think we've architected in the best way possible. We've run it through well-architected review. How can we ensure we maintain operational support throughout the lifetime of that workload as we go live? And this is where, and we recognize this is quite key, especially for customers that operate multiple workloads. So this is where we have the concept of enterprise support. So this is a separate contract, but what we do provide as part of enterprise support is what we call a technical account manager. And that is, it's a designated technical point of contact that works as your key person to coordinate and orchestrate operational support activities from an AWS perspective. And what we've found is the provision of enterprise support to our customers is a very key services, and it's something that our customers like, because what our customers do when they're working with our technical account manager, our TAM, is that TAM can coordinate the appropriate subject matter experts as needed in the operational running of their workloads. They can provide support concierge, like dedicated team of specialists. If you as a customer are actually receiving spam or some form of abuse, then enterprise support can help coordinate that. But not just that, is they can also define as part of your operational model, which is something that customers really have to work through and define, is they can help you build in all the appropriate mechanisms to support that operational model. So like the well-architected review that I've mentioned, any sort of operational architecture support. But another key thing is what we call infrastructure event management. So when you actually do have a go live and you want to make sure that there is smooth running to that go live, then what that is support around the pre, the actual go live and post go live to make sure that the AWS's environment is running as you intended, and if there's any problems that are encountered during that process, then the team will work with you to make sure that they are addressed as quickly as possible. And then the lessons learned is done out of that. And then in terms of the black, these are other mechanisms that we have, like a personal health dashboard. Our support services are API driven, so you can get access, you can subscribe to our what we call status.aws.amazon.com, which is basically, it's a live and near real-time indication of the operational status of our services. So that enables you as a customer. And that's another transparency mechanism that we have, as well as tools such as Trusted Advisor. So we find that this is a very important mechanism when working with our customers, enables them to trust us when the workloads go into production. So in summary, is when you're considering the use of AWS, is what I recommend as a customer is when you go through that assessment is to adopt and work through the 5 stages that I've progressed. So first is understand the shared responsibility model. And what I mean by that is not just understanding the responsibilities in terms of us as a provider and yourselves in terms of how you configure and secure the platform, but more importantly is what does that mean internally for your organization, and what do you need to do to build in the capability to use workloads on AWS, and how can we help you with that? The second thing is understanding our infrastructure and service portfolio. We have a plethora of documentation and resources available for that, but we also have a lot of subject matter experts that are more than willing to help you and talk through that with you. Third is the due diligence process, the actual assessment of AWS in terms of its security services. So we make those services available, those security attestations, those reports available to you, and can talk through that with you. So I talk through these reports with the customers that I work with in terms of controls that they want to get an understanding over, as well as working with them to understand what AWS security services there are and how to apply them in the best possible manner. Where you do work in industries that are highly regulated, or you do have deep concerns over data privacy and security, is to contact us and to work with us in terms of understanding how we manage data security, especially over those hot topics, those sensitive topics. More than happy to work with you and explain the relevant controls to help give you comfort in terms of the way that we operate. And lastly is to leverage the AWS portfolio of services and tools. There are quite a number of services available. If you do not think that there is a service available, do not hesitate to contact your AWS representative or the people that you work with, because we will do what we can. And you may not even be aware that there are services that we can assist you with. And so finally, thank you for your time. I hope this presentation has been of use to you. I will be over to the right if any of you have any questions that you wish to ask. I'm more than happy to answer them. And finally, before you go, if there's a favor that I can ask is if you could please complete the session survey in the mobile app, because feedback is very important and we do take that very seriously. So again, thank you for your time.